Good. So good morning to everyone, and welcome to those who are joining us from different parts of the world here on Bere Island. Yesterday we looked at this very simple but very deep poem by Seamus Heaney on St. Kevin and the Blackbird. It's a very simple poem, but a very deep one, and so as I was reading it again this morning, I thought it would be good for us to revisit it, because it gives us in very simple and beautiful language, very precise language. So come in. You have to. Are there any others waiting to come in? No. It gives us in this very simple, very precise language ways of understanding our own experience of meditation, and indeed the way meditation transforms our way of perception and our quality of attention in life. So we'll come back to that as a friend, as a little companion on this way. And we're going to, Leo will put up the poem on the live blog for those who'd like to read it. The poem itself is very much about attention. You remember St. Kevin is praying with his arms outstretched, and without him realizing it, he's so absorbed in his prayer, the blackbird comes and makes a nest in his hand, and when he realizes it, out of compassion, and we'll see the link between attention and compassion throughout these reflections. Out of compassion and love and tenderness for this visitor, for this life, this fragile, beautiful life of the blackbird and the eggs, he remains still. He remains in this state of attention, and then at the end of the poem, Seamus Heaney explains or gives us an insight into the deep significance of this, especially when he speaks about the deep river of love, love's deep river. And then this little line, which is actually a saying of St. Ignatius of Loyola, to labour and not to seek reward. So suggesting here that Kevin has been working. Attention is a work. In the contemplative tradition, meditation has always been seen as a work. Today we think of meditation or mindfulness as ways of relaxing, after work. But in the wisdom traditions, meditation itself is a kind of work. It's a different kind of work from when you're making your living or you're writing essays or you're earning money, but it's a work nonetheless. So we'll come back to that, and we'll also look at today St. Francis, who also had this relationship, this empathy and this sense of joyful oneness with the natural world, and his immediate perception of things and creatures in the universe. But just to come back to this central theme of this retreat, this theme of attention. Attention is perhaps the most important element in all human activity. Whatever we're doing, the quality of that activity, whether it's thinking or creating or working with our hands or the dimension of our relationships, all the different kinds of relationships that make up our identity. Whatever it is, the quality of attention really determines the quality of our life and of the particular activity we're involved in. And so if this quality of attention is damaged, is undeveloped, then really the whole of our life is handicapped, has been undermined. And prayer is simply the highest form of attention. It's when, in that, as we see in that poem of St. Kevin, the whole of our being becomes this state of attention. A prayer his body makes entirely, is how Seamus puts it. And the physicality of this attention is very important, I think, for us to reflect on, especially in Holy Week. And after all, what we're reflecting on in the Passion of Jesus is what happens to him in and through his body, and the transformation through suffering and love of his body through death into his spiritual body, the church, through the resurrection. So the physicality of attention is deeply relevant to this. We normally think of attention as just a mental state, concentration. But as we'll see in a minute, it's more than, attention is something more than concentration or different from concentration. And prayer can be understood as the highest form of attention. We have another little distinction here we can play with, which is between attention and intention. And of course, intention is important. We have to intend to do something before we do it consciously. We have to intend to come to Bere Island for the retreat. We have to intend to sit down and meditate at certain times. So an intention is a requirement of any conscious activity. However, once the intention has got us to the point where we've started the work, then I think attention is what we develop rather than intention. In concentration, when we're concentrating on a problem, we're concentrating on something we have to learn, then we're, as it were, strengthening our intention. We want to learn it, or we want to solve this problem. But in other forms of activity, that intention recedes more into the background, and what takes its place is attention. And this is where ordinary work starts to become prayer. So ordinary things that we're doing, cutting the vegetables, making your bed in the morning, going for a walk, reading a poem, that these ordinary things in life acquire a spiritual depth and quality and resonance because we're moving from the willfulness of intention, I want to do this, and I want to do it well, or I want to enjoy it, or I want to get the most out of it. So we move from this intention to something that is more selfless. And attention essentially is the transcendence of our ego. Now we need an ego to get started. When you book your air ticket to come to Bere Island, it's your name on the boarding pass. And if your name isn't on it, then you won't get on the plane. So that's your separate identity. You have your own seat on the plane. But that's only a vehicle. That's only a function and a practical necessity. And once that has been taken care of, we are free then to move from the ego intentionality into a selfless attention. And that's where things begin really to get interesting, and where we really begin to see the transformative and power and the enjoyment value of attention itself. And this is one of the basic human qualities which have been damaged in modern culture for many people. This quality of attention, with so much emphasis upon ego satisfaction, ego achievement, and the intentionality, what I want, you know, the consumerism of our culture. It's not just the supermarket, but it affects really everything from medicine to education as well. I was very struck some time ago when some students had signed up for a course that I was giving, and at a university, and one of them wrote to me before the course started and said he was going to miss the first 3 classes. Just told me. So I said, well, that's actually quite a serious impediment to this short course. And I mentioned it to somebody in the university, and they said, well, actually, he's bought it. He bought the course. And I never thought of that before. Education as a commodity that you're buying, and you've got a right to this, you know. Okay, the only sort of sanction you have is the grade you give at the end. And that was the advice I was given. You can't say, no, you can't come, because he's bought it. You know, it's his property now. What you can say is, well, actually, I think you're not going to get a very good grade. So you got the message. So, but it struck me, and it hurt me, really, to think that this education, which is the relationship upon which all teaching depends, has been turned into this kind of commodity that you buy and you have a right to and you expect. And so, as much as true, the same is true about the way health has become seen as a commodity which we buy, we have a right to, and so on. And even though we may not be looking after ourselves, we expect the medical industry to give us health without our having to give up cigarettes or eating bad food or not doing exercise and so on. So I think it's something that's grown rather insidiously in our way of thinking about life and our relationship to major aspects of our life, like education or health, that we have that it is something we can acquire if we want it, and we have the means to buy it. So this is very different from attention. Attention is not concerned at all with with acquisition or possession at all. The work of attention is something very selfless, and this is captured in the poem about St. Kevin, with those last 2 lines where Kevin is described in this way: for he has forgotten self, forgotten the bird, and on the riverbank forgotten the river's name. Now that might suggest, he'd gone senile, or, and that his meditation had kind of fried his brain. But I think it's something different from that. I think it's about a forgetting of self, which is actually at the same time an expansion of self, of consciousness, and a moving beyond the labels, the river's name, that we normally see things through. We see things through the labels, through the names, through the descriptions that we give to things. And in the contemplative perception, contemplation, when we see things in a direct way, we see through the label. The label is not important. We see the thing in itself. So developing this capacity for attention is which we are losing and being undermined in many ways in our culture. Seems to be a very important priority. This is what William James said 100 years ago. The ability to control attention is the very root of judgment, character and will. To improve this function will be the education par excellence. So this is very much in tune with what Simone Weil says in a little essay she wrote on the meaning of education and its relationship to the development of attention. She says really the whole purpose of education is not just to give good grades or qualifications to the student, which is largely how education is seen today, but it is to develop within the child, through school studies, this quality of attention, which is the essence of prayer, and ultimately the essence of the compassion that we show to other people. Compassion is simply selfless attention to another in their need, which allows us to enter into their experience without trying to possess or to control them. And she even goes so far as to say, and this is what makes her quite difficult, I think, for modern practitioners of education to understand. She says, actually, it may be through the child's failures in their academic studies that this quality of attention can be best developed. Because, you know, if we all know this, if you're good at a subject, you don't have to work very hard at it. It just comes naturally and you get good grades, or you understand it quickly. But if it's something you're not naturally good at, like maths perhaps for me, or something like that, or a language, then the child needs encouragement to remain with that subject and to continue to work with an attentive mind and spirit, even though they're not getting good grades. And it's the meaning of education that is being practiced here. So very different from, you know, our attitude to education today, which is, you know, just get good grades and don't do the subjects that you're not going to get good grades at. So I think this idea of linking education and attention is very relevant to the spiritual dimension of meditation. You could meditate just because you want to lower your blood pressure, or maybe sleep better at night, or, you know, for all the physical or psychological benefits that doubtless come with meditation. But if that is simply your intention, then you're limiting the transformative value and the deep meaning of the practice. And that may be how people start, and maybe that's how we all start to some degree. What am I going to get out of this? But if we remain at that level of intentionality, and we don't develop that spirit of attention in the work, we're going to limit the degree to which we can be transformed by it and educated by it. To see something as an education of the heart, for example, is to recognize the need for discipline. We can't learn anything unless we practice a discipline, or we can't sustain that learning unless there is a discipline. We just learn it in a very fragmentary way. But if we want to integrate what we learn and develop what we learn and expand our minds and hearts through what we learn, then we need to understand what discipline means. And that's the same word as disciple. It comes from the Latin word to learn, discere, to learn. And this is why John Main, for example, always insists, approach the meditation as a learning process, not as a technique to master. A big difference between a technique and a discipline. There are techniques we need to learn to make sure that the webcast goes out properly, and or how to start a car or drive a car, or use a computer program. So there's a value in learning techniques, but you can master a technique, but you don't master a discipline, actually. Speak to a musician, for example, who loves the instrument and the music and the music making. They'll never say, I have achieved, I don't need to do this anymore, I can move on to something else. If it's the particular work that gives them the capacity to pay attention and the delight of this work of contemplation, if playing the violin or the guitar or the banjo is what gives them that entry into the experience of contemplation, they're never going to say, I've mastered it. I mean, they will say, yes, I've achieved some technical skills in this instrument, but now I just embarked on a lifelong learning in the discipline, and they will be happy to do this, to do their practice, to keep their hand in, and to maybe to continue to develop their technique or to maintain their technique. But behind that is the discipline of love, which is their relationship to their work. So, William James also says, he concludes that there's thoughtful words about the purpose of education as the development of attention, by saying, reality is the place where we put our attention. Reality is where we place our attention. That is what is real to us. That is where we enter into reality and into truth through what we pay attention to. So we should be careful what we pay attention to. But also, in a sense, if we truly pay attention, anything will do it. Anything will take us through the looking glass of the ego. When we're doing something merely with intentionality, we're doing it because we want to get something out of it, egotistically, we're always going to be looking at our own reflection in the mirror of what we're doing. We're always going to be seeing, what grade am I getting? And am I getting something out of this? Or am I getting approval or fame or recognition for what I'm doing, or whatever? So there'll always be this ego reflection in the work that you're doing. Whereas, if we refine and develop this quality of attention in whatever we're doing, it could be fishing, it could be cooking scallops, it could be, tying your shoelace. If we develop this quality of attention in what we're doing, we pass through the mirror of the ego, and we no longer see the work that we're doing in egotistical terms. What am I getting out of it, and so on and so on. It becomes selfless, and therefore it opens up reality to us. There's a distinction here also, it might be helpful to grasp this, and I think it comes through the poem too, between concentration and attention. Concentration is more to do with intention. I've really got to study, I've really got to acquire this, I've got to memorize this, I've got to learn this in order to pass the test. And again, that's a useful and necessary function in life. Some things you have to learn by learning them off by heart or learning them by repetition. But concentration is driven by effort, your effort, and your will to achieve either mastery of it or the benefits that you think it will bring you. Whereas attention, as we see from the poem, St. Kevin standing there until the eggs are hatched, is something very different. In that sustained work of attention, where we pass beyond the motivation of the ego, okay? We go beyond the ego's reasons for doing things. We sustain the attention in a way that allows things to happen. And what happens in the poem are the eggs are hatched. And in that process of allowing things to happen naturally, we find ourselves having lost ourselves. We find that the ego-driven element of motivation in what we're doing is shrinking. And eventually, as at the end of the poem, it becomes actually non-existent. He has forgotten himself. Egotistically, he has forgotten himself. So, attention leads to an expansion of consciousness beyond the ego. But that doesn't mean to say that in terms of ordinary life, we can't achieve a balance between concentration and attention. We don't have to go to the extreme of Saint Kevin, who does nothing else except hold his arms out. So, integrating our ego with our lives in a way that places the ego in a subordinate position, but allows it at the same time to fulfill its function, its purpose, to have a healthy ego, we would say, is part of education. And the education of the heart, emotional education, is what we hope that we are able to teach children, so that they grow up not to be selfish little monsters who become dictators and ruthless leaders, or incapacitated by their own greed and appetites, and immature in their way of dealing with suffering. So we hope that we will educate children to be able to have a healthy ego, but at the same time to know and to see when the ego is taking over, when the ego is distorting our view of reality, and to be able to control that, to step back from that. And that's, I think, why we need to learn to meditate as soon as possible in life, because meditation is developing, as William James says, it's developing this function, as he calls it, of attention. So learning to pay attention, as Simon Weil also understood, requires training. We need to learn it as soon as possible in life. The later we leave it, the more difficult it's going to be. The more we will have developed the habit of doing everything in an egocentric way, as a technique to master rather than as a discipline to love. So the sooner the better that we learn how to develop this muscle of attention and to exercise it on a regular basis rather than just, I was talking to a doctor the other day about the problem of obesity in Western society and the effects this is having on our healthcare system. And he said actually the worst thing to do is go on a diet. He said everybody's going on diets. He said that isn't the best way. The best way is to basically change your lifestyle. You could lose weight with enough intentionality, going on, grapefruit diet or whatever is the latest diet. But then the old lifestyle returns. And you find after whatever it is, a few months, you start putting the pounds on again. So it's not learning the discipline of attention to improve the quality of our life across the whole spectrum of our life is best achieved, as St. Benedict understood, by moderate, regular practice, rather than by going on a binge, on a meditation binge, you know, and but to build into our ordinary, regular daily lives, these times of meditation, morning and evening, is much more effective and transformative, and keeps you healthy and keeps you at the right level, the right body mass, as it were. So attention requires commitment. It requires purpose, and it requires, or it brings us to detachment. In other words, we're not trying to get something out of it. To labour and not to seek reward. That's the key. And it's quite countercultural to our the way we've been conditioned. To labour and not to seek reward. This is exactly how John Main speaks about meditation. He says when you learn to meditate, right from the very beginning, try to get your attitude right. In other words, don't, he says, have any demands or expectations about the meditation. Well, that seems almost impossible even to understand what that means. But it's a very good thing to hear in your introduction to meditation. And even though you don't understand it at first, you just leave it there as an instruction until you begin to understand what it means. And then you catch yourself at the right moment, and you can apply it, you see the wisdom of it, and that this is the attitude, to labour and not to seek reward. This is the attitude which is actually going to help you to learn much more easily and effectively. I just wanted to give you a little break from all of this that might seem a bit abstract. I hope not too abstract. Just to come back to Seamus Heaney, another poem, this time not a legend, but a memory of his childhood. And again, his great gift as a poet is to speak in this sort of very conversational tone, just telling you something he remembers. But as he tells it, you're being drawn into a very deep level of perception, clarity, but a very deep perception. I'll just give you the first section of this poem, which is called Wheels Within Wheels, and it's about him as a child discovering the wonder of spinning a wheel on a bike. It's all simple as that. And it's the sort of thing we may remember ourselves if we've got that kind of memory, or something you can see a child doing when a child just becomes absorbed in something. I was talking to a young parent the other day, he was showing me all the presents or all the toys that I think his 18-month-old child had. You know, vastly expensive, and of much more value probably to the people who gave the present than to the child. So the child would be quite happy just playing with the wheel of a bike, rather than all these expensive gadgets and toys. Anyway, this is what he says. The first real grip I ever got on things was when I learned the art of pedaling by hand a bike turned upside down and drove its back wheel preternaturally fast. I loved the disappearance of the spokes, the way the space between the hub and rim hummed with transparency. If you threw a potato into it, the hooped air spun mush and drizzled back into your face. If you touched it with a straw, the straw frittered. Something about the way those pedal treads worked very palpably at first against you, and then began to sweep your hand ahead into a new momentum, that all entered me, like an access of free power. As if belief caught up and spun the objects of belief in an orbit coterminous with longing. Now, those last three lines you can spend the rest of the week reflecting on. But this is what poetry is, isn't it? It draws you in through this visual, sensory description of a child spinning the back wheel of an upside down bike, and then throwing a potato into it and seeing the potato sort of mushed, and then putting a straw into it and seeing the straw frittered, broken away. And but then the understanding of what is happening here. This is probably took him 50 years to write this poem and understand and share what he was seeing and feeling and experiencing actually in that wonder, in that childlike wonder and that playful childlike wonder. What was he actually experiencing? So 50 years later he begins to try to explain it. And what he says is, well, that it all entered him. The whole experience, spinning the wheel and playing with it, entered me like an access of free power. So this is attention, I think. This is what happens in contemplation. This is where the access of free power, I think this is an experience of God, we would almost say. Why not call it this? I think he's experiencing prayer in a very pure way. And beyond belief. And as he says himself, interestingly at this point, he makes a distinction between the experience itself and belief. The belief is caught up and spun the objects of belief in an orbit coterminous with longing. Well, we won't go into what that means. But I think you can see that he's describing how the experience is more than belief. And what you believe, how you explain things, the symbols that try to give expression to what you're experiencing, those are caught up in the experience itself. So, and I think that's important for Holy Week, because what do we believe in Holy Week? I think it's very helpful for us to come to the reading of the Passion narrative, the last hours of Jesus' life, with some belief system. Quite difficult to engage with it, to spin it without having some kind of belief system. And that belief, but that belief is not as it were the essence of the experience. The mystery of the telling of the story that we do in Holy Week, the reflecting on it, the contemplation of it, and the repetition of it, our going back to it, like the spinning of the wheel. We do that, we tell the story again and again, like spinning a prayer wheel. So we go back to the story and allowing it to enter us. It entered, what does he say? It entered me. Did you say that? That all entered me like an access of free power, as it were beyond belief. So I think it's the same with a spiritual approach rather than only a religious approach to the story of Holy Week that we are living, we live in. It is to allow ourselves to be helped by our beliefs and the great beliefs that have expressed the meaning of the Passion of Jesus. But belief is not the thing in itself. Belief is not the access of free power that comes to us through this experience of contemplation. So, this is what contemplative practice is all about. It's why what we see in that poem about the wheel, and we sense it in the humour of the poem about St. Kevin. Remember, he tells the story of Kevin and the blackbird as a legend. He says, and since the whole thing's imagined anyhow, imagine being Kevin. So, and then he begins the poem in this sort of light way. And then there was St. Kevin and the blackbird, so it was part of a light conversation almost. So he's not asking you to get pious about this story or develop a devotion to St. Kevin. Saying this is a story, but we can learn from this story. So there's this light-heartedness, this playfulness that he brings to the story of Kevin, but related in this other poem to the joyfulness of the child playing with this old bike. And actually, at the end of the poem, it's quite realistic. He's describing how he found another place to play with this wheel. He would go and spin it in the mud and loved seeing the mud fly all over the place. I touched the tires to the water's surface, then turned the pedals until, like a mill wheel pouring at the treadles, but here reversed and lashing a mare's tail, the world-refreshing and immersed black wheel spun lace and dirt suds there before my eyes and showered me in my own regenerate clays. So in other words, he's spinning the wheel and all the mud covers him. This is his earth, his own earth from which he came. For weeks I made a nimbus of old glit. Then the hub jammed, rims rusted, the chain snapped. So he's broken. Has to find something else to play with. So there is this playfulness and this sort of detachment from the experience, which I think is very close to the playfulness of spirit that a child brings to meditation, and with that we should try to bring to meditation as well. But it's not immediately related to belief. It's about direct perception and allowing the reality of it to enter into us. If we can learn to approach the discipline of any contemplative practice in this way, it will, I think, develop within us this capacity to experience all of life with this direct perception. In other words, you start to meditate, and then you'll begin to find that it's changing the way you live and deal with whatever life's wheel spins at you, whatever it covers you with. For example, I mean, in the Christian mystical tradition, they speak about the first stage of contemplation as natural contemplation. So it's something here on Bere Island we might reflect on in the coming days. It's the discovery of God in creation around us, in the things around us, in the weather, in the people, in the living things around us, and in the natural world around us. It's discovering God in God's own creation, in the beauty and wonder of the world, being able to see and relate to the things and the people and to creation in this childlike way, which is exactly how Seamus Heaney related to his childhood experiences, and which he captured with all the greatness of his talent. But it's also that childlike directness of perception which lies behind great scientific advances and new paradigms in science. As Einstein said, the reason he was able to make the discoveries he made was simply because he kept on asking the questions of a child that his peers, you know, his childhood friends, had been told to stop asking because they were childish questions. So he kept on seeing the world with this wonder of a child, and fortunately he had a good mind as well. Finding the world at your gate, in other words, rather than finding it just through the accumulation of labels and preconceived beliefs that we normally package the world in. So that the world is both full of wonder, but is not exotic. We don't have to go to the furthest end of the earth in order to be stimulated with this sense of wonder. We are filled with this wonder and this childlike vision and this playful relationship wherever we are, wherever we happen to be. In Sanskrit, in Indian philosophy, they speak about lila, the playfulness of God. And in fact, in the Book of Wisdom, there's a description of wisdom playing before the throne of God. And play is associated with joy, with lightness of being, and with the delight in what you're doing for its own sake. That's why play is such an essential evolutionary advance. In the evolutionary process, mammals, I think it's only mammals as far as I know, who start to play. And this playfulness is not only, you may learn a lot of things through playing, but it's the delight in the play itself that is the really transformative and indeed spiritual quality of it. So when we develop this capacity for natural contemplation, which comes naturally as we practice the discipline of attention, and develop a contemplative consciousness through particular times of exercise, particular times of work. This, if you look at it from one very intentional perspective, you could say it reduces stress, which is why perhaps most people in the world are taking up meditation to reduce stress. Well, what does that mean actually? What do you do when you have reduced stress, or you find that you're able to deal with stress much better? Well, that's where it begins to get interesting. It's like, for example, a man going to a doctor, and he's very overweight, he does no exercise, he's drinking too much, he's smoking, and generally eating McDonald's every day. So generally he's got to change, and by learning how to care for himself better and to get himself back into a healthier, more natural state, what then? Because that's only the beginning. It's just getting back to a place where you can live healthily and enjoyably and function as you are meant to function, to see as you are meant to see. So, in the same way, we may think of meditation as a way of de-stressing, which it is. We may be too stressed. However, the real purpose of it is to lead us into this contemplative vision of the world. And when that happens, a very important change takes place in the way we relate to the world, because we're seeing it in a different way. We're seeing it in a more friendly way. It's no longer full of threats and dangers and competitiveness and, me against the world. We begin to see the world as friendly and to develop an intimacy with creation and with all creatures. And no one expresses this better. We see that in St. Kevin, that very tender language describing how the blackbird lands and settles down to nest. Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked neat head and claws, and finding himself linked into the network of eternal life, is moved to pity. So the tenderness that he feels towards this tiny little creature, the physicality of it, and filled with compassion for it at the same time. So, no one expresses that better, of course, also than St. Francis. St. Francis's view of the world and his sense of gratitude, his sense of exaltation, his joyfulness, his pleasure in the physical universe. Let's listen to this famous canticle of Brother Sun and Sister Moon. No mortal lips are worthy to pronounce your name. Be praised, my Lord, through all your creatures. So it's the creation that becomes the praise, not my words, not my going to church, as it were, but my church is, cathedral is the world, is creation. Especially through my Lord, Brother, Sun, who brings the day, and you give light through him, and he is beautiful and radiant in all his splendor. Of you, Most High, he bears the likeness. Be praised, my Lord, through Sister Moon and the stars, in the heavens. You have made them bright, precious and beautiful. Be praised, my Lord, through brothers wind and air, in clouds and storms, and all the weather, through which you give your creatures sustenance. Be praised, my Lord, through sister water. She is very useful and humble, and precious and pure. Be praised, my Lord, through brother fire, through whom you brighten the night. He is beautiful and cheerful, and powerful and strong. Be praised, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who feeds us and rules us, and produces various fruits with coloured flowers and herbs. Be praised, my Lord, through those who forgive for love of you, through those who endure sickness and trial. Happy those who endure in peace, for by you Most High they will be crowned. And be praised, my Lord, through our sister bodily death, from whose embrace no living person can escape. So, I think what we can see in both these examples, Seamus Heaney, St. Kevin and Francis's vision of the world is a contemplative consciousness, a contemplative direct perception. And it's that directness of perception and that sense of intimacy with the world that is our key to understanding and allowing the life of it to enter us, to understand the meaning of these days, where we reflect upon the culmination of Jesus' life. We could just take, before we meditate, we could take a few minutes if anyone would like to share any comments or raise any questions at all. Okay, well, you got one?
Question of yesterday.
Ah, yes. Somebody asked yesterday, I think Federico asked about love of self. What does it mean to love yourself? Well, I think you could say, I heard somebody say this in a talk they were giving recently. Meditation is the kindest thing you can do to yourself and to others. I think it's "and to others" which is which captures the depth of it. To love yourself is, I mean, if you love someone, you care for them. You want their well-being. You want them to enjoy life. You want them to be safe. You want them to have the best possible experience of life. It's what a parent feels for a child, or a friend should feel for another friend. And if we love the world, then we have a sense of justice. That's how we would like society to be, to allow everybody the fullest potential to live life without fear, without unnecessary suffering. So I think the same is true for ourselves. We love ourselves in the same way. We should take care of ourselves physically, psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, creatively. Each of us has slightly different component parts. We all have the same parts, but they're put together a little differently. We have different gifts and different ways of functioning. Self-knowledge, and mistakes and experience help us to understand ourselves and how we can function most fully. That requires, I think, a sense of our uniqueness and self-acceptance. I met a student once some years ago who was a law student, and quite an unhappy law student. and he told me he didn't really want to be a lawyer. It was his father who wanted him to be a lawyer, because his father had a big law firm and wanted him to follow in his footsteps. And he was going to, and I don't know, maybe he did. But I said, well, what would you really like to do? He said, be a carpenter.
Mm.
So, everybody has to make those decisions, but maybe he did carpentry at weekends. Maybe he's longing to retire so he can work in his workshop. So I think it takes courage to love yourself in that sense, to be truthful to yourself, to do what it is you are meant to do rather than what other people think you should do or what society has conditioned you to do. And so it comes back to this idea of solitude, the acceptance and recognition of your uniqueness, and then accepting that. And then you take what comes. And you can't, if everyone's into, at a younger and younger age, I was talking to somebody in their late 20s the other day who was really anxious about their retirement. And, well, I don't know, maybe you should be today. It seems that, I don't know whether there'll be any pension funds in 50 years' time anyway. But that's conditioning. And we're conditioned to feel that we have to plan out our life, to control it, and to achieve our goals. That's all sort of management speak. And up to a point, I suppose, we have to make some plans and decisions. But basically, as we don't know what's going to happen in the best laid plans, all we can do is get to the place where we can accept ourselves and then respond to what happens from a place of clarity and a place of peace. So loving yourself, I think, begins with this work of knowing yourself, self-knowledge, and then and staying in that self-knowledge with a lightness of being, a lightness of touch that enables you to take what comes and to respond. So in that sense, I would agree. I think meditation is a very direct way of loving yourself, and it brings about in your temperament, in your mind, in your psyche, a way of caring for yourself that isn't self-obsessed, that isn't self-fixated or driven by fears of your pension or whatever. It's not controlled by ego needs, but is free to receive the gift of life and to experience the delight in life that St. Francis describes there. Anybody got any? Please. Okay.
I like as you talk about meditation and the fruits of meditation, and I like what you say about the world becoming a friendlier place,
Mm-hmm.
or we feel the world becomes a friendlier place. I have a family member who has a constant stream. The news is on 24/7.
Mm.
The constant stream of the news and the bad things that are happening in the world, and he'll say to me, don't you care? Aren't you worried? And don't you care? And I never quite know how to respond to the yes, I care, but I don't want to get caught up in all the his distress over what he sees.
Yes, I think it's remember you get a contemplative person, thinking of, say, John Mayne or B. Griffiths, from whom I learned a lot. They know what's going on in the world. They're contemporaries. They're not frightened of the messiness or the problems of the world, but they're informed in a way that makes them compassionate and detached, rather than addicted to the sensationalism and to the emotionalism with which the news is normally presented. So I would say, if you're watching, news 24/7, there's an addiction, and I think we get hooked, especially today, because when there was those in Paris, those terrible incidents. It was a few months ago, and the world was watching it minute by minute. Probably the French political leaders were watching. They were getting more information from the media than they were from intelligence services. I don't know, but I think when Gorbachev was that sort of palace revolution that took place, he said he couldn't trust any information coming to him in his office except through the BBC. He sat there listening to the radio. So I think a contemplative person is somebody who knows that they belong to the world and to the human family and needs to be informed about it. I think we should be careful about where we get that information, and we should be careful that we acquire it in some depth. I mean, most of us get information from the internet now. Maybe, and then probably the second major source of information, but it always comes as an opinion, is through the TV. I suppose newspapers are less powerful sources of information. And there's only so much time in the world. I mean, for some people it may be better to read one weekly journal rather than which keeps you informed. Maybe listen to one news broadcast a day, just in case the world is blown up. So you're realising that you want to know. Can't wait till the next week to get it from The Economist. But I think some self-control over how you are informed is important. And the way the media hooks us and seduces us today is something that we should be conscious of and resist. And I think meditation makes us more critical in that sense, would make us better citizens, because it gives us that detachment.
Question or comment, or what about working, in an industry or a company or?
Excuse me, madam. Could you raise your volume because we can't get
All right.
through.
What about working in an industry or a company that is can be a very negative environment? I worked on Wall Street for years, and it's worse than ever in terms of the environment, the stress, the self-centeredness of certain people in that industry. And yet, if you have people working for you, you want to create an environment for them that they can cope with what's going on around them. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, thank you. Well, Bere, what are your thoughts about working in a negative is a human resource, head of human resources for a big company. Do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's one of the greatest challenges we have as corporate officers or business persons. And I think it leads us to, there's not a lot we can do as business leaders we can do to promote better environments, but I think business world will be as active and we will find all kinds of attitudes, and there's not a lot what we can do to control those attitudes. There's a lot that we can do about controlling our reaction, our response. And definitely in that sense, I think meditation is probably the most effective and primary tool to deal with that. That said, there's a lot to work still to be done in that field.
Thank you. I was glad that he was able to say meditation. Yes, I agree. I think you can't control the corporate culture, but you can make a difference. And that's what leadership is about. I think you have to be, I would say, be honest about your own motivation for being there. Is it to make a lot of money at any cost? Or do you also feel that what you're doing, and this may be the difference, say, between the private sector and the public sector, between Wall Street and, you know, a major public financial institution, do you feel you're doing good for the world? And I think if you really feel, I mean, I remember asking a financial leader once this question, which was very naive, I realized, but they were closing, during the austerity cuts in Britain, they were closing libraries. Well, libraries are not, you know, imagine the biggest cost, but they were cutting and closing the libraries. And I said to this business leader, why couldn't one of the big banks who've been bailed out during the crisis and been saved by public taxes, why couldn't one of these banks, it wouldn't have cost them, you know, peanuts to keep these libraries open, even give them their brand name if they wanted. And it shocked me, his reply. He said, they don't care. I said, well, wouldn't it be good for the public image to do that? He said, they don't care. They don't even care about their public image as long as they can. Now, that's some people, obviously. But it was enough to, you know, this person who knew the culture very well to identify it as a not caring. I mean, that is frightening. So that should be exposed, I think. I suppose the only thing we can do is, I was very, you know, Lee Kuan Yew died recently, and there's been a lot of coverage in the media about his amazing achievement in making Singapore what it is. And what struck me personally about him was, when I met him on quite a few occasions, because he was learning to meditate, was his great honesty about his career and himself. He knew he was a politician. He said, I'm a fighter. And he said, anybody attacks me, I will attack them back. You know, he was totally honest about it. And he said, he said, and I've made very difficult decisions that I would rather not have had to make. But I did them because I was convinced that the long-term well-being of Singapore depended on it. Now, you can argue about that, but you can't deny he was being transparent about himself and his personality and so on. And that, I think, was his integrity. So I think maybe the difference we make in a corporate culture, which may have been hijacked by the ego and greed and not caring for the rest of the world. What we can do is to be honest about ourselves and transparent about our own motivation, and that would probably, that might mean that you leave Wall Street and become a carpenter, or it might mean that you do everything you can to make sure that activity, that financial corporate activity, is directed as much as possible to the well-being of others, not just to the self-serving of the people running it. That makes a difference. A little bit goes a long way.